This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual Purge, sanctioned by the U.S. government.
Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes.
And, for the first time since its inception, no one has been granted special immunity from the Purge. No citizen or group will be exempt. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.
It was quiet outside Aaron's house, and that's what probably was the most unnerving part of this whole night. He stared up at the dark ceiling over his bed. He technically wasn't allowed to do anything but sit there. His windows were locked, curtains pulled tight, so no light could even see so much as a flicker outside. This meant no TV, no games, no phone, no anything. Aaron didn't even really get the point. If someone wanted to get in the house, they'd just break in regardless, if they thought someone wasn't home. He supposed it wasn't the robbers his parents had on their minds, but the people who wanted to do far worse. Aaron reached up to rub his hands on his face. He understood the pretense better now than when he was a child. But even still living through the night of chaos every year, and walking up to so much death and destruction was surreal, to say the least. He never actually was directly involved. He never even left his house on this night in his 17 years. He also knew that every year his dad sat downstairs, glass of whiskey in one hand and the other hand in reach of a shotgun. Aaron heard gunshots only a few times coming from downstairs in his life, and when the morning came it was never discussed. He tried not to question it too much, because he and his parents were still alive. He groaned and rolled over on his bed. He should just try and sleep, but how could he when any noise could be someone in the house? Aaron pushed himself up so he could let his bare feet hit the ground, before walking over to the window. When he was younger, he'd sleep in his parents' bed with his mom for comfort, and so he didn't go throwing the curtains open. No one would know now, though. As carefully as he could, he poked an eye out of the curtain. He couldn't see much but his front yard, and a bit of the Ackerman's house across the street. Aaron couldn't see anyone outside, but he lived in the suburbs. There was no doubt some fucked up people who wanted to take advantage of the one night of freedom. Aaron walked back to his bed, flopping back down on his bed before reaching for his phone off the nightstand. Yeah, his mom said no phones, but the backlight was on the lowest setting and completely silent. He opened up his recent conversations and picked the name at the top. So any news if your Uncle Kenny has finally come out as the serial killer we always thought he was? Aaron could almost see the way Mikasa would roll her eyes when she read it. He wondered if she was even awake. His phone lit up lightly in his lap, and he guessed that was his answer. Not yet, but my parents turned off all our phones for the night. He snorted as he started to type. Breaking the rules, Mick? I'm so proud. Aren't you calling the kettle black just a little bit? He knew Mikasa since they were kids. He could see the glint in her eyes, the slight tease in her voice, even though they're just words on a screen. What my mom doesn't know won't hurt her. Aaron tossed his phone down on the bed. He was tempted to look outside again, but it seemed just as quiet as before. He waited till words popped on his screen to look back down. It's pretty quiet, though. Good. As long as they don't keep me up, I don't care. A noise outside had Aaron's head snapping up as he hit send. Even though he knew he was safe, his heart was in his throat. He knew what could be out there. You hear that? He sent to Mikasa, but this time he kept his phone in his hand. No, there's nothing over here. At least that I heard. He breathed a sigh of relief. He'd rather it be on his end than hers. Granted, she was safe with her father, who was a cop guarding the door, but at the same time there was more than a few people who targeted cops and their families come Purge night. It wouldn't be the first time Aaron heard gunshots coming from the Ackermans' home this night. It scared the shit out of him when he was younger, but he had walkie-talkies then and phones now to make sure everything was okay. He didn't know what he'd do if they weren't. "Are you okay?" Came another message from Mikasa. "Yeah, don't know what it was, but I'll go make sure my dad heard it." Aaron technically was supposed to stay in his room, but he was just trying to help after all. His parents couldn't get too mad. "Be careful, Aaron." He held his phone in his hand, making sure he could see it, if it lit up again. As he stepped out into the hallway, everything was dark, but he was careful to move quietly so he didn't alarm his mom in her room. He walked down the steps, but stopped at the last one. His dad was right around the corner, and the last thing Aaron wanted to do was startle the man with the gun. His dad was calm and not easy to jump, but Aaron would rather play it safe. "Dad, it's me. Any reason you're standing there and not in your room like you should be?" Grisha said back, but he really didn't sound too surprised. Aaron stepped onto the first floor of his house, turning into the doorway that led to the living room. His dad was sitting right where Aaron left him a few hours before, in the armchair facing the front door. It was pretty dark in the room, but Aaron's eyes were adjusting well enough to be able to see the outlines of the room. "I just wanted to make sure you heard that noise just now." Grisha arched an eyebrow and a smile pulled at his lips. "What makes you think I didn't?" Aaron opened his mouth to tell Grisha, but quickly realized that would mean Aaron would have to out himself on his phone usage. "No reason. Couldn't be because you heard it, but Mikasa didn't, so he decided to come down and make sure everything was okay." Aaron was glad it was dark so he didn't have to face his dad's teasing when Aaron's face heated up. "Did you hear it?" "I did. But it seemed like it was heading away from us, so I didn't worry quite yet. Neither should you." Aaron supposed his dad was right. No reason to freak out over everything. "Why don't you go back up to your room, and I won't tell your mother you've been texting Mikasa this whole time," Grisha said. Aaron was about to respond that it wasn't the whole time, but he figured it wasn't worth that conversation. "Night, Dad." "Good night, Aaron." He walked back up the stairs, but he heard the noise again. But like laughter this time. It wasn't close to the door, he didn't think, but people were out on the street. "I heard that one." Aaron listened to the footsteps, the voices, the shuffling, in the otherwise quiet night. Grisha shifted in his chair. Aaron brought his phone up so he could see the keypad. "I wouldn't worry about." A loud crash cut through the air. Wood cracked and splintered. Taunting voices hollered. Aaron could only stare at his door, expecting it to come crumbling down. But the sickening realization soon, too, came. It wasn't his door. A gunshot sounded, almost making Aaron drop his phone. His father was shouting his name, but Aaron only saw the words on the screen. "They're in my house." Grisha had his gun in his hand as he grabbed Aaron's shoulder. "Get upstairs." More gunshots echoed. "Aaron, go now." "She told me to hide in my closet." The gunshots stopped, and just like that it was quiet again. But Aaron knew better. His stomach was turning, his heart pounding in his throat as he looked down, when his phone lit up again. "Aaron, I'm afraid." Grisha was at the front window, his mom's footsteps rushing to the top of the stairs. Aaron turned and swung open the door, stepping out into his front yard. Carla was shouting at him. Grisha probably already running out of the house, but Aaron really didn't care. He wasn't leaving Mikasa to die. No fucking way in hell. He heard more footsteps. Someone was singing off in the distance. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw fire, torches, more death and destruction. Aaron ran until he reached the broken front door of the Ackerman house. He knew his parents wouldn't risk running out and drawing more attention to him. He stepped inside the dark room, but the sight almost made him double over. Even just in the moonlight, he had never seen so much blood, bodies, laying so lifeless. Not just any bodies, but ones he had known almost his whole life. People who cared for him, people who loved their daughter. Shuffling upstairs sent a jolt of adrenaline through his body. He forced his feet to move, heading into the kitchen, where the back staircase was. He slipped his phone in his pocket, though he remembered too late. He never told Mikasa he was coming for her. If she died with the last thing being he wasn't coming, he just... Eren clenched his jaw as he stepped into the familiar room. It looked like it always did. He would even bet there were fresh cookies in the cookie jar. It wasn't the same though, and it never would be again. Instead of going for a cookie as per habit, he grabbed a knife from a nearby holder. He gripped the plastic handle in his hand, trying to keep his arms from shaking as he walked up the small stairs. It was almost too quiet upstairs, making Eren's stomach sink so low he wanted to throw up. Mikasa's door was cracked open at the end of the hall, though no light was coming out of it. The closer he got, he could hear scuffling, mumbling, a gasp, struggle. His hand held the knife so tightly he thought he might crack the handle, while he used his other hand to push the door open. He tried to brace himself for what he might see, but it was no use. Nothing could have made him ready to see a man, a stranger, pushing Mikasa up against her wall, his fat fucking fingers around her neck. She was alive. Her face was changing from red to pale, and her eyes were drooping from a lack of significant oxygen, but she never gave that bastard the satisfaction of one cry from her lips. Her half-lidded eyes met Eren's, and all he saw was red. He barely felt his body move, let alone hear the scream that fell from the man's mouth when Eren shoved the knife in the bastard's back. It was enough for him to let go of Mikasa and fall to the ground. Eren took great satisfaction in seeing scratch marks all over the man's neck and sides of his face as he went down. He was still squirming though, crying, cursing, trying to get back up. Like hell that was happening. Like hell he'd get a chance to ever lay a hand on Mikasa again. Eren swung down the knife on the masked man's chest, stopping his movements, while blood sank into Mikasa's once tanned carpet. The knife fell from Eren's hand, dropping to the floor as he fell back onto his heels. He brought a hand up to his forehead, staring at the body in front of him, and only then realizing his hand was splattered in blood.
Eren.
Mikasa wheezed, her voice barely even coming out. He felt his mind snap out of its daze. Mikasa was on her hands and knees, trying to catch her breath, her wide eyes watching him. He scrambled to crawl over to her, hands reaching out for her face. "Are you okay? Mikasa? Are you okay?" He went to look at her neck, but the sudden fearful look in her eyes made him stop.
Eren.
She coughed, trying desperately to catch her breath, hands reaching up to grab his shoulders.
There's one more.
He felt the sharp, searing pain in his side when he saw the other man walk back into the room. Eren pushed himself up to his hands, trying to recover from the kick to his gut, trying to put himself in front of Mikasa, who was calling his name. But the new masked man grabbed a hold of the front of Eren's shirt, pulling him up to his feet. "Well, well, come to save your little girlfriend, did you?" The man sneered from under the mask. Eren reached his hands up to try and pry himself away from the man's grip, but he shoved Eren up against the wall, his head colliding back. His vision was coming in and out from the pain. He could barely keep up the struggle. "Eren," Mikasa cried. "Why don't we end this nice and easy?" The man said, reaching down to pull a gun from his belt. "And blow the brains out of your pretty little head."
Run.
Eren hissed, trying to find Mikasa through his pain-clouded vision.
Mikasa, go.
He felt the warm barrel of the gun press against his forehead, and then it was gone. Eren staggered to his feet just as the masked man dropped with a cry. The knife fell to the ground once more. Mikasa was standing up in front of him, her breathing still haggard as she stared at the man who was just threatening Eren, now withering on the ground. Tears were in her eyes as she looked up. I couldn't let them hurt you," she breathed. Eren pulled her into his arms, letting her hands curl into his shirt as she buried her face into him. "We have to move." He didn't think he needed to say why. She nodded, but didn't say anything more. Eren took her hand and pulled her out of the room. Mikasa tried to lead him down the main staircase, but Aaron tugged her in the other direction. There was no way he'd let her see what was still there in the living room. She must have assumed, because with a choked sob, she followed him with no other question. Aaron didn't stop till they were out of the house, the night air almost refreshing, if he still wasn't in disbelief of what just happened. Get home. He had to get home. Just cross the street and get him and Mikasa safe. It wasn't safe, though. The streets was flocked with masked people, all wandering around, wondering what the commotion was, and wondering what was left for them. There was no way he could cross the street undetected. He had no idea what kind of weapons they had. He could never risk Mikasa's life like that. His house door looked closed, curtains shut tightly, so at least his parents were safe, and he hoped it stayed that way. Aaron carefully stood in front of Mikasa, making sure she was close to the outer wall of her house, but not close enough to make her relive the trauma she just had to go through. Tears were rolling down her face, but she never made a noise. She just watched him. "We're gonna have to run. Are you okay to do that?" In the moonlight, he could already see the bruises that asshole left on her neck, and Aaron just wanted to go back upstairs and kick that bastard. She swallowed, her face starting to look more panicked. "Are you? Aaron, you... Hey!" He reached his hands up to her face, holding her so she looked up at him. "I will always protect you. Always." Mikasa nodded and reached up to wipe off the mix of blood and tears on her face. A noise too close made Aaron jump, and he knew they had to go. He looked to the woods behind her house. It could be even more dangerous out in there, but what choice did they have? "Till sunrise," he said, taking her hand again. "Till sunrise," she repeated with a deep breath. When Aaron started to run for the woods, she followed right by his side.